This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. Every Tuesday, I have the opportunity to sit down and visit with my friend Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about today. Eric, how are you?
Well, I'm good. You remember back in the 90s when we used to play Where's Waldo?
Oh, yeah.
Now we're playing Where's Joe?
Boy, the mystery deepens as far as the President of the United States hasn't been seen for a few days, and there are some pretty interesting theories circulating. I'd love to get your take on what seems most probable.
Well, certainly something seems fishy. As recently as Friday, I believe, he was insisting adamantly that he's not dropping out of the race despite the various calls from the people within his own party to do so. And then within literally 24 hours or so, we're supposed to believe that he's changed his mind, reversed course, and a letter is issued ostensibly under his signature in which he bows out of the race. And since that time, nobody's seen the guy. And all that we have is this very garbled, fishy-sounding phone call that was supposedly made to Kamala Harris. And it's just, it's something's not right about this scenario. And it makes you wonder, I don't think this is an unreasonable thing to wonder given the times that we live in. Maybe he didn't want to go gently into that good night, and maybe they're keeping him under house arrest and they're trying to coach him so as to get him to go before the public and say, yeah, I chose to opt out of the race, rather than the angry old man refusing to accept the inevitable.
Yeah, and this is the toughest part for me. I don't know what to believe at this point. There is so much deception, and clearly at this point, things are being hidden from us that we just can't handle the truth apparently, and so it's very hard to know which voices to listen to, which gut feeling to follow. I'm not sure I know where to find the truth on any of this.
Well, none of us do, and it calls to mind back in the late 70s and the early 80s. There was a whole branch of political science devoted to Sovietology, and one of the things that was of chief interest was figuring out which of the old half-dead mummies that would stand atop Lenin's mausoleum had disappeared and why. It was all inscrutable. One of the old geezers would just be gone, and then the academics would puzzle out over the power shakeup and who's going to emerge in charge. Well, that's where this country is now, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's not a minor thing either. The Democrats are getting ready to have their convention, but it sure seems like everybody who voted, all the delegates who voted for Joe Biden in the primary, have been disregarded. And if I'm remembering this correctly, that would mean this is the third election in a row that the primary voters have basically been told, sorry, you're going to have to shove it. We'll pick who the nominee is going to be.
Yeah, to clear-thinking people, it's evident. The party of democracy, in air fingers quotes, is not very democratic. They shoved Bernie Sanders aside for Hillary back in 2016, and here we are doing it again. They're just anointing Kamala the presumptive nominee, even though nobody within the Democratic primary system voted for her. It's pretty astonishing, and it's going to be interesting to see whether the rank and file left. I refer to the Democrat Party now as the left party because really functionally that's what it is. Whether they're going to stomach that, whether they're going to abide that, I don't know. And there's also the other interesting question to get back to what we've been talking about. If Joe Biden is too enfeebled, too old, too mentally incapacitated, too physically weak to run for another term as president, how can he possibly be allowed to remain in office as president for the next 5 months? Really?
And I'm sorry to have to bring up this sore spot, but all the talk about, the whole January 6th tribunals and the reason we had to weaponize the Department of Justice against half the country is in order to save our democracy. And yet they're disenfranchising millions of voters. They're trying to imprison Donald Trump. They're abusing the FISA court, weaponizing the justice system, rigging primaries, taking names off ballots. They raided Trump's private residence with the threat of deadly force, shutting off surveillance cameras, fabricating evidence. I've got a whole list here. Eliminating the Electoral College. They want to gag. They want to censor. They want to expand the Supreme Court, ban voter ID, deny Secret Service resources, and flood the country with millions of illegals. That's how we're going to save democracy.
Apparently so. And I think that it's inevitable, probably within the next week, maybe two, that by some hook or by crook, they are going to formally remove Joe Biden from office and anoint Kamala Harris president, at which point things change markedly, because right now she's still legally just the vice president and the putative nominee for president. she becomes president, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, she then has the authority to choose a vice president. And that vice presidential choice will more than likely be the one that she runs with, obviously. So, that is going to give us a real window into what they have in mind for us. And I've heard Hillary Clinton, believe it or not, being talked about as a potential vice president for Kamala Harris.
Oh, man. I in the background, I always hear those leathery wings flapping.
Yeah.
She's just waiting for her turn.
Yeah, James Consular first used that term, and I borrowed it with credit because I think it's just so apt.
Yeah, it's, Consular used to be really on the edge, of, wow, he's got the hot take here, but even he, I'm sure, is scratching his head going, really? It's gonna go this crazy? I appreciate his musings, but I'm rapidly getting to the point where I feel like, on the one hand, we're entering historic territory. Like, I don't think this has been seen before in the history of the Republic. And on the other hand, it feels like a very dangerous place to be at the same time.
Well, no question. I think you can draw a parallel, it occurs to me as we're talking, with what happens in a hyperinflation scenario. It doesn't happen gradually. It happens suddenly. It takes a little while for the momentum to build and for all the pieces to fall into place. And then, boom, everything changes. And all of a sudden, your money is worthless. And politically, I think that the situation is quite comparable. You have a little bit of craziness here, a little bit of craziness there. But before you know it, the crazies take over. And once the crazies take over, everything goes completely berserk. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen.
Suddenly, the election seems like it's a long way off. And I don't know if I'm grateful for that or if I wish we could just cut to the chase and get the drama out of the way, because it just feels like it's growing exponentially.
Yeah, I wonder still whether we're even going to get there. God only knows what's going to happen over just the course of the next couple of weeks with regard to Biden, with regard to the Democrats' convention that comes up in August. Again, you wonder whether the rank and file left is going to close ranks behind the undemocratically selected by the party brokers, Kamala Harris, that they've had no say in. And from what I gather, people don't like her. Even people within her own party do not like her. And they might just get very irritated. And who knows what the factions have in mind. Maybe the Obama people are not going to put up with it because they want Michelle. Maybe Clinton's people are not going to put up with it for a variety of their own reasons. There's lots of people. And if anything can be known about the left, it's that the left cares about power. And if they see their power threatened individually, they're going to go after those who they perceive to be threatening it, even within their own party. It's a piranha fest.
Well, and I hate to bring up this sore spot, but since it's kind of vanished from the news cycle, Donald Trump survives the assassination attempt. Sure seems like the news media has dropped that story, or at least its curiosity regarding what happened there, in a big fat hurry.
Well, yeah, and I'll issue one of my extremely rare defenses of the mainstream media in that, Donald Trump is okay for now. He survived the attempt. And so we can put that on the back burner a little bit. I think the more important issue is who's running the country right now. That's obviously a serious question. And I think it's one that people are not only wanting the answer to, are feeling really creeped out about now.
Talk to me about, I don't know if you caught any of the coverage of Kimberly Cheadle, the director of the Secret Service, sitting on the hot seat, to put it mildly, yesterday. But good heavens, I don't think I've ever seen members of Congress be more direct in questioning, a federal official.
Yeah, I saw some of it with, in particular, Nancy Mace. Is that the woman's name?
Yeah, from South Carolina.
Her questioning, which, I share her exasperation, and she even resorted to using a profanity when addressing Cheadle because it's inexcusable. It's not just the usual political double talk. It's outright dissembling. And even more egregious is this Cheadle person is still in the position that she holds. She should have been fired within 24 hours of what happened at that Trump rally. It's unconscionable.
I don't consider myself an analyst of any type, but what was very clear to even a layman like myself was the Cheadle was clearly obfuscating. She was avoiding giving any kind of direct answer. And I have to wonder, who gave her the order? Don't say any more than you absolutely have to. Don't give any light that we don't want out there. It seems like this just reinforces the weaponization of the Department of Justice. I wonder if this comes from Merrick Garland himself.
Well, sure, of course, obviously. It comes from higher-ups. And these higher-ups do not want even the origins of Cheadle's hiring being looked into. Who is this person? this person apparently, from what I gather, was once the head of security for Pepsi. I think that's her. Those are her CVs.
And
to be head of
Doritos.
the Secret Service. Yeah, Doritos. So she ran the rent-a-cops for Doritos, basically. And now she's the head of the Secret Service. And it's obviously the only reason that she's in there is because she's a DEI hire, a person who should never have been put into that position in the first place.
It's also interesting that Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas,
Yeah.
issued this namby-pamby statement about how dare people question women in law enforcement, when the bigger question was, how could there have been such a collection of incompetence as what we saw in Butler, Pennsylvania? Funny how he shifted the discussion.
Yeah, let's turn this around. Can you imagine the poo storm that would have ensued? Well, I guess we're out of time.
Hold that thought.
We'll talk
Hold that
about it
thought.
later.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, we are back. We had to go to break just as Eric was beginning a thought here on Alejandro Mayorkas, DHS Secretary. Yeah, he is, well, he's a piece of work, to put it mildly, but he offers this statement about how dare somebody question women in law enforcement, and he meant at every level, when the real question was, how on earth did you see this cascade of failures in Butler, Pennsylvania, that allowed an identified threat to remain unchallenged, and more importantly, they still brought former President Trump out, put him on the stage with a clear line of sight shot at him, apparently from this individual.
Yeah, they lie with an audacity that is truly spectacular. They have no shame whatsoever. And to get a sense of it, you can imagine if the situation were changed around just a little bit. Let's say that we were talking about a Republican administration and some kook took a shot at a Democrat left politician. Like, let's say somebody took a shot at Barack Obama or Michelle Obama. Do you suppose that the polite line of inquiry would have been similar or different?
Yeah, I don't even know. I just can't believe the level of mendacity that we're dealing with these folks. Nobody is so far, willing to step down. Although I heard numerous calls on the part of Director Cheadle. You will either step down or we will work to have you impeached. I don't think I've seen this much fire in the belly of Republicans in quite some time. And I don't think it's just partisan acting like I'm sometimes, prone to dismiss it as, this is just more DC melodrama. I'm seeing some real serious anger, but I'm also seeing, the blob, as James Howard Kunstler calls it, basically just protecting itself. Say nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations.
Yeah, I think the anger is legitimate and palpable, and I think it arises from a growing comprehension that these people are not well-intended. It's not, I made a mistake and I'm sorry. They are shameless. They are the most corrupt, awful people that you can imagine, and they just don't care, except for power. That they do care about a lot, and they will do absolutely anything to hold on to it. And once people get that and understand that and realize what they're dealing with, then they know how to deal with it. The problem is, until now, people have not really understood that, and as a result, they've been kind of impotent to deal with it.
It sure leaves a lot of things up in the air, which leads me to the next train of thought here, and that is, all right, so neither you nor I hold the levers of power, particularly in D.C. What do you see as a good course of action for any thinking adult to take with this much uncertainty, in the air all around us?
Well, try to maintain your sanity, first of all, and try to keep your anxiety and fear in check because, as you say, we really don't have a whole lot of control right now over the machinations, over what's going on, but we do have a lot of control over our own lives. And we can take decisions and take actions that are to our benefit and to the benefit of the people around us. And to the extent that we can do that, we should do that. And just be aware. It's kind of like walking around in a bad neighborhood. Don't look down at the concrete. Make sure that you're looking around you to see what's around you, because if you see it coming at you, you've got a better chance of dealing with it effectively.
Well, and I would also echo the words of Ryan McMakin from the Mises Institute. Recognize that for all the talk that you're hearing about, we've got to protect democracy, and you're a bad person if you don't. What that now means is that basically if you're going to be in favor of democracy in 2024, you must support whatever the ruling party elites want you to support.
Yeah. I'll go deeper than that. I really believe it's important for us to battle this idea that democracy is some sort of a holy ideal. It isn't. It's a very dangerous doctrine. Intelligent people throughout history have always understood that. Democracy at its core fundamentally is unlimited majority rule, which allows the majority, when it rules, to do whatever it wants to the minority. That's an exceedingly dangerous, evil doctrine, and that's why the Founding Fathers put so many safeguards, checks, and balances into our system of government to limit democracy. It's very, very important to address that issue, I think.
Hear, hear. I just, my number one goal for the last few years has been, in the words of Caitlin Johnstone, to make myself an unplayable piece on the chessboard of life. And if you can do that, even in small ways, you will still retain, a degree of your freedom. There's no perfectly free place at this point. So, get it out of your head that somehow I'm going to get to Galt's Gulch, but you can still do a lot to create Galt Gulch friendly conditions around yourself. And it's probably in your interest to get started on that sooner than later.
It's the most important thing that there is. Don't make yourself dependent on other people for things, particularly on the government. Look to yourself, look to your own resources. And those resources include your family and your friends, the people around you, non-coercive, cooperative relationships. Those are the important things.
Hear, hear. Let's talk automotive stuff. I need a little bit of a brain cleanse, but I saw that you had recently written that the Chevy Camaro is going the way of the Whigs and a lot of other great cars for that matter.
Yeah, the last pony car standing, I should say, is the Ford Mustang. So as it was in the beginning, so it is at the end. The Mustang came out in 1964, and it created a whole new category of vehicle because it was so popular that everybody else looked at it and said, wow, that's a great idea. So before you know it, Chevy came out with the Camaro and Dodge came out with the Challenger, and they all proliferated and did really well. And then the government got involved and systematically made it harder and harder to continue to sell vehicles like that, particularly to a mass audience. If you can imagine, at the height of Camaro's popularity in the mid-late 70s, GM was selling more than 100,000 of those things annually, with the country being 100 million fewer than today. It's astounding. Wow. And that's because they were affordable. Almost anybody could buy one. I own 5, and most of those I owned when I was young. Not new, but nonetheless, you could afford to get them. Well, they become increasingly unaffordable, so the market has diminished to basically middle-aged guys like us who want to relive our high school era days and go out and get a Camaro. But there are only so many of us that can afford to do that, too. Also, there's the political consideration. General Motors has decided it's going to become the purveyor of EVs, and cars like Camaro don't fit in with that optic, so they're getting rid of it. The good news is that Ford has continued to stand strong and will continue to produce the Mustang for the foreseeable future. So there's some good news along with the bad news.
It's kind of the last performance car standing, isn't it? And
it's one of them. It's the last car of its type standing. You can still get a lot of performance cars. I mean, to be fair, technically, a Tesla S is a performance car, but Mustang was a pony car, very different kind of an animal. And by the way, I just published a piece about the battery-powered Charger that was supposed to be here by now. And it's curious, kind of like Joe, where is it? How come it's not out? I think the reason for that is that Dodge is desperately trying to avoid a massive belly flop because EVs have really fallen through the floor in terms of sales. And they are going to try to get out an engine-powered version. They have a hybrid version of it that was supposed to come out on the heels of the electric version. I think they're going to try to put out that version first to avoid a flop, because if it flops, Dodge is done. Dodge only has 2 models for sale right now, the Durango, which is an SUV, and the Hornet, which is a little crossover. And it's not a bad vehicle, but people don't go to Dodge for crossovers. You can't sustain a brand on 2 models.
Well, it leaves me wondering, too, what are our police forces going to do? They need a good overpowered cruiser out there patrolling the neighborhoods and the highways.
They don't drive those anymore. What they drive now generally are the Ford Explorer. Ford makes a police interceptor version of the Explorer, and that's become the go-to vehicle for cops. And Ford still makes that. So, they're going to continue to use that for as long as Ford makes that.
Well, at least I guess Ford is still in the game, and it's still a V8 powered Interceptor, correct?
Oh no, it's not. It's V6 powered, and the cops don't like it very much. They really miss. And I actually have a neighbor who's a state cop, and he used to have a Ford Crown Vic, which is a nice big sedan with plenty of room in it. And they missed that car. Imagine if you had to spend 8 hours plus just kind of sitting in a car all day. You probably want like a nice big, basically a big American Luxo boat kind of a car. And the Crown Vic is sorely missed, and it's been gone for more than 10 years. 2011 was the last year that was available. And once again, because of the government. It was a popular vehicle. It sold well, but it couldn't comply with the regulations, so Ford canceled it.
There's a lesson in here somewhere, but we'll have to explore that next week. Eric, as always, thank you for your insights.
You bet, Brian. Thank you for having me on.
All right, again, you can check out ericpetersautos.com. I've got a link in today's show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. These are the show notes for July 23rd, 2024.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show. This is The Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Thanks again for tuning in. A lot of confusing stuff going on right now, right? I don't have any answers as far as, I can tell you exactly why this is happening or why that's happening. I can tell you this, though, as much as I don't want to admit it, I'm susceptible to media manipulation. And if you're being truthful with yourself, you'll probably at some level have to admit, yes, you are as well. And look, the little screen that we carry around in our pockets and that we're constantly staring at is a really big reason why. Because there are innumerable opinions and hot takes going on about whatever current event there is. And frankly, there have been some pretty amazing, uncharted, historic events going on. Just, the last couple of weeks have been really something else. I wanted to share with you an article. This is from offguardian.org, and it's from Sylvia Shawcross. It's called The Man on the Stage. Now, she specifically is talking about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. But since we're trying to sort out what's going on with Biden and, where is he? Is he dead? Is he dying? Why hasn't he been seen? Have we just seen a bloodless coup take place, at the highest levels of the U.S. government? Again, there's that possibility that we could be manipulated if we're not careful. But I especially would encourage you to consider her words in the wake of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Now, Sylvia Shawcross says, look, here's some unsolicited advice from an old woman living in the wilderness of Canada. And she says, I mean well. So I hope you'll take what she has to say in the spirit it's intended. This is not to tell you, hey, you people are all stupid and I'm smarter than you. Sylvia says, there is something going on in the world that you cared about last week. Consumed most of your energy in terms of what you believed in working towards. Then there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and you've forgotten all about last week. And maybe last week you'd forgotten about something from the week before that you honestly cared about working towards. She says, regress and return until you arrive at a place in the here and now where you don't know what to care about and you don't care to care. Because the goal always was to get you to this point, exhausted, disillusioned, confused, and divided. Now, this is where she starts throwing some pretty hard truths, so I'm warning you, this may sting a little. Sylvia Shawcross says, something happened to a man on a stage. You will be told what happened. You will be told who is to blame. You will be divided over both these things. You'll be shown pictures and videos which you know are easily fabricated. You'll be introduced to people who have an opinion on what happened. Experts will be paraded. Emotions will be exaggerated. You will find yourselves in arguments about older issues on whether the man on the stage is Satan or a saint. You'll see visceral hatred and cultish love. You will think you are discerning the truth for yourself, but you would be wrong. You are being given all the information it has been decided you will be given. And the arguments were already anticipated, and while you're eventually exhausted, disillusioned, confused, and divided, the machine in the background carries on. And if the machine in the background wants you to believe something to further its agenda, it will. The man on the stage was attacked by Iran, China, Russia, the opposition, a self-serving false flag, a lone crazed gunman on mental health drugs, LGBTQ2S plus activists, globalist elites, a group of terrorists. You'll hear in speeches the oh so noble entreaties for toning down the hate from the ones who were the worst propagators of it. Does that confuse you? It should. It's meant to. It is no apology or recognition. It is soulless rhetoric manipulating for power. There is nothing genuine about it. The only thing you need to know is that this event happened, and it is not over. I wasn't kidding, was I? That's some pretty tough medicine. Now, Sylvia says positions once forgiving and or moderate and or tolerant, but no longer so, are being cemented into place for all the people who believe in any or all of the above reasons a man on stage was attacked. And that spells dangerous times ahead. She says there is no going back to a naive, pretend, lackadaisical world anymore for many. You must now believe what you believe. And this is where she has some very practical advice. She says, make it for the good and not for evil. That's the choice to be made. And if you have a hard time discerning good from evil, look to your heart and soul and ask if you are choosing to harm another rather than choosing to harm a position taken by another. That's about as rudimentary as it can get. Do you want to hurt that person, or do you want to hurt what that person stands for? And more importantly, she says, don't cheer anyone who celebrates the hurting of others. That is the ugly face phenomenon of taking pleasure in the pain of others, absolutely overtaking the world. And she says it has to stop for the sake of us all. It's one thing to be grimly determined to seek change on an issue, but it's quite another to want to cause serious harm to another and or enjoy watching it. That's nothing to celebrate. It simply contorts what would simply be a stern but determined visage into a contorted, ugly face. She says it can be assumed that the shocking incidents will be coming fast and furiously for the next while. So remember the issue you firmly believed in and hold on tight and keep on trucking for the good, not for evil, for life, not for death. That seems like pretty solid advice to me. Again, this is Sylvia Shawcross. This one was actually published on, well, I guess it was just a couple of days ago, July 19th. So it was over the weekend, last Friday. I think she has some really sound advice for us here, though. And she identifies way more than I'm comfortable admitting, actually, how easy it is to get caught up into it, where you pick a side. It's either that manic hatred or that cultish love. And that's exactly what we've seen. So hopefully you recognize what's going on. Hopefully you recognize the event is far from over. Look, like a lot of people, I kind of felt this sigh of relief come through me, like, oh, thank goodness, the assassination attempt was unsuccessful. Because I've seriously wondered, what would we look like? What would our nation look like right now had we been witnesses to Trump's head exploding on a stage, and that being shown over and over and over to demoralize anybody who even isn't necessarily MAGA, but just isn't on board with the current cabal in power in Washington, D.C. You think the January 6th stuff was hard to stomach? Woof. It'd be nothing compared to that. And I don't know exactly what happened. I couldn't tell you. Was there more than one shooter? Was there, was there collaboration between agencies? Was there complicity on the part of those who were supposed to be protecting the former president? Or was it just incompetence? I'll tell you what, after watching the director of the Secret Service, holy cow, Miss Cheadle, I don't think I've ever seen a more brutal rhetorical evisceration of somebody before Congress. And while I'll give her credit, she showed up and took it, but it also was very clear she was not going to say a word. She's been ordered clearly by someone higher up, don't say a word. Do not commit to anything. Do not give the truth, which to me really represents just the depth of how weaponized our Department of Justice has become. I don't want to put superhuman abilities on somebody, but I think Merrick Garland may be one of the biggest threats to this country at the moment. And he believes himself untouchable. Voted, found in contempt of Congress. but Congress couldn't find the will to actually have him arrested. And he still refuses to provide information that could have been crucial to understanding what was really going on with the president's state of mind. You know, with the her interviews about classified documents kept in Biden's garage. It's a mess, isn't it? And I'm sorry, I'm focusing. I hate that I'm directing your attention now toward that mess and telling you, hey, you know, here's what's happening. Well, at the same time, trying to urge you, don't get hyper-focused on it. It's like, don't look where I'm pointing, right? I'm sorry. I'm sending mixed messages here. So let me see if I can bring it back full circle. Sylvia Shawcross, when she says, look, it can be assumed the shocking instances will be coming fast and furiously for the next while. She's right. And it's happening actually with greater intensity than I think even most of us anticipated. But she counsels, and I echo this, remember what you firmly believed in and hold on tight. And resolve to keep trucking for good. Don't allow yourself to be manipulated into anger. Don't allow yourself to feel like I've got to lash out, even if it's just rhetorically, you know, writing, you know, angry words, you know, to express how upset you are. It's a trap. And I think right now we're in a very dangerous place in that there are people who are very desperate to hang on to power. They are looking and casting about for any excuse to exercise their power to absolutely consolidate it as thoroughly as they can. And anybody who in any way acts out violently is going to be used as the justification for an absolute clampdown. Yeah, I don't want to believe it either, but we are sitting at a crossroads at this moment that could very well see the end of the Republic as we've known it.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. Final segment of today's show. Hopefully you have found, some hope to hold on to amidst all the analysis and the, can you believe this is going on? On the one hand, it's very exciting. On the other hand, it's like I told a friend, I'm like, I prefer when we lived in times that weren't quite as interesting as right now, because I felt much more secure when there were more things that were solid and the world didn't feel like sand shifting underneath my feet. But coming back to the idea of, okay, so what do you stand for, right? This is the important thing. What do you stand upon? First and foremost, I will tell you that freedom has been the message that I have felt prompted to share and to defend and to promote for the last 30 years. That's when I first cracked open the microphone as a talk radio host. I went from being a music DJ to a talk radio host, reluctantly at that. I didn't want to host talk radio. It sounded boring. But I started doing it, and there, somewhere along the way, pretty early on, something clicked. That there are some things that really need to be discussed, need to be talked about, need to be defended and promoted. Freedom being one of them. In fact, I want to share with you an article from Adam Gree. This is from intellectualtakeout.org. I've not seen a lot of Adam's writings before, but I'm very impressed with what this guy has to say. He's becoming one of my favorite contributors on Intellectual Takeout. And the title of this piece is Freedom. It's not about what you want. Listen to this. He asks, is a king free if he can't control his own passions? Adam Gree says, this question has puzzled philosophers for thousands of years. In an age when most people in the West have standards of living markedly higher than the kings of ancient times, it's worth returning to this puzzle to try to get to the heart of what freedom really is. Today, we often define freedom as the ability to do whatever we want to do so long as we aren't harming someone else. If that is true, an all-powerful king would be about as free as anyone ever could be, even if he remained a slave to his passions. Clearly, then, this modern view of freedom is missing something. In an important sense, a king who spends his days trying to fulfill his every desire has no more of an ability to do what he thinks is best than an ordinary peasant. All the wealth and power that he has at his disposal are only fuel on the flames of his uncontrolled emotional life. Now, he gives a good example of this. Today, we can see this thought experiment take shape in the form of those who are addicted to pornography. Like the king, they are not threatened by starvation and no army lies poised to attack them. They enjoy all sorts of legal protections on their rights to free speech, to contract, and to property. And yet, even so, they remain deeply unfree. Many of the great philosophers of ancient and medieval times took an important lesson from this paradox. Freedom is not fundamentally about doing what you want to do. Rather than being encapsulated by an assortment of political rights, freedom is the mature capacity to do what is good for oneself and one's neighbors. You see the difference? Adam de Gree says this idea is so radically different from our modern interpretation of freedom that it's worth looking at a few more examples. So to speak German freely, you must learn the rules of German grammar. Good luck. By the way, my daughter has been living in Germany for 5 years now, and she's pretty fluent. But she still says it's the hardest thing ever, trying to learn the rules of German grammar. Here's another example. To converse freely with your neighbors, you have to tolerate their opinions. Here's another. To play the violin freely, you have to learn to read musical notation. Now, Adam de Gree says, our modern understanding of freedom makes it seem as though we are most free when we do whatever we want to do. Yet each of these examples shows that freedom is not something that magically appears when the right set of laws are put in place. Rather, freedom is something that must be achieved. In order to achieve freedom, you have to align yourself with the order of the universe. Now, that's a point made eloquently by the philosopher Matthew Crawford in Shop Class as Soulcraft. As he explains, that alignment does not come easy. So as you grapple with German grammar, your head aches, you listen to your neighbor's conspiracy theories, your eyes start to roll. It's only through a concerted effort that you can fit your behavior to the rules of the world. Yet once you achieve that self-mastery, you move through the world as a free being. The fact is that humans are not the sort of beings that will ever be free from constraint. We live in a world bound by laws that are not of our own making. The universe we were born into is governed by physical laws. The societies that raised us are ordered by natural laws. No piece of legislation can ever change that. Yet when we live in accordance with the fundamental laws that structure reality, we live well. Now, the Greeks had a term for the order they perceived in the universe, cosmos. Importantly, this word does not merely refer to a system bound by law, it also signifies harmony. And Adam de Gree says to the Greeks' greatest thinkers, a free being was one who successfully aligned himself with the beautifully ordered universe. Now, that's an idea worth reviving. Now, if you haven't read some of the great Greek philosophers, I know it sounds very hoity-toity what you're suggesting there, Bryan, but I only suggest this because it's something I was willing to do myself. And frankly, I don't do it as much as I once did. My great books, well, I'm looking over at them on the shelf, and it's like, yeah, they're gathering dust here at the moment. But I will tell you from firsthand experience, having done this myself, something incredible happens to your mind when you expose it to the thoughts and the words and the ideas of these great philosophers. And some of those Greek philosophers were among the greatest, even if they didn't get everything right. Plato's Republic, boy, he had the idea for the perfect society. Doesn't mean he got everything right, but if you can make yourself read and understand what he was saying, and by the way, it's not something, well, I'll sit down and breeze through it in a weekend and absorb every bit of knowledge. What makes a classic is the fact that you can go back to it over and over again, and every time you learn something new, there's something that adds to your foundational knowledge. But the beauty of the great books of Western civilization, and I'm picking on them in particular, is that by exposing yourself to ideas that are over your head, the ones that actually take effort to understand and to assimilate, you order your thinking. You learn to become a better, stronger, more capable thinker. I don't know how to describe it other than it's kind of like calisthenics. except you're exercising your mental muscles. You're building neural pathways in your brain every time you tackle an idea that is the equivalent of climbing a rope, hand over hand, sweat pouring in your eyes, as Mortimer Adler put it. That's what it's like to try to get your mind around truly great ideas. Which, by the way, you don't have to agree with those ideas. But the effort is what makes you a better, more capable thinker. And if there was ever a time for that, it's now. I love the idea here that Adam de Gree leaves us with, which is to live in harmony with the ordered universe. In other words, with the laws of nature, and I'm going to throw in, and nature's God. Not only do you find yourself not painting yourself into a corner of consequences when you do this, but you find yourself appreciating everything at a much deeper level than you did before. Something that I hope you'll think about. Okay, one final note. I have included the latest column from Michael Herman about our ball of confusion. And if you really want a good, quick take on what's going on, Michael's one of the best. He writes daily. I think it's pretty much every day I see a new column from him. And I love his style of writing in that it's brutally honest. He's not just trying to turn a pretty phrase or, put soft words in your ears. Say, oh, that feels good. Thank you. He really, I believe, is thinking through and trying to suss out what's going on. And this is not, for masochists who, oh, goody, this will tell me how bad everything is in exquisite detail so I can sit here and just wallow in, how awful it is. He just offers, I think, an informed take of someone who is very actively paying attention and doing his best to make sense of it. And that's the other thing I love about his writing. He doesn't pretend he's got all the answers. He does ask a lot of questions. And his parting advice in this column, I think, is very good. Speaking specifically about what's going on within the Democratic Party, which I guess we're going to be learning about in some detail over the next few days. He says, "Get ready, boys and girls. This is going to be one interesting convention when the Democrats come to Chicago." He says, there's a big piece of cheese up for grabs, and the biggest rats are all scurrying for their position to eat the biggest share. Somehow that seems like one of the more apt descriptions that I've heard. Again, you'll find it in my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.